Welcome to Cooking the Books, the food and hospitality podcast discussing all aspects of the industry. We interview chefs, butchers, brewers, winemakers, restaurateurs, restaurant managers, and we talk about how they got to this point, through the good times and the bad, and what they've got planned for the future. This is Cooking the Books. This week on the podcast, we had Vanessa and Matt from Rooftop Honey. These guys are urban beekeepers. They have hives on top of buildings all over the city. They can tell you where their honey comes from, down to the postcode. It's fucking amazing. If you're interested in bees and the amazing part that bees play in the ecosystem, you're going to thoroughly enjoy this. I really thought it was bees. I knew the pollinated things. Obviously, it's part of their job. But I'm going to be honest, I thought that mainly they made honey. But how little I knew about how much they actually pollinate food for us to eat. Without them, we're as good as screwed. So we all need to take a little bit more care and, appreciate the bees and maybe do a little bit more for them because they do so much for us. This week, the podcast is brought to you by City Larder, the charcuterie specialists, specialising in terrines, pâtés and rillettes for the retail and food service market here in Australia. City Larder just received 2 gold medals for the free-range chicken leek and truffle terrine and also the free-range chicken liver pâté. The only charcuterie company to receive gold medals for terrines, pâtés or rillettes this year in the Australian Food Awards. Now, over to the show. Guys, awesome. Nice to meet you. Matt, I've never met you before. Nice to see you again, for sure.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Do you want to take 2 minutes and just explain who you are and what you do and the rest of it?
Sure. My name's Vanessa and we are Rooftop Honey and we look after bees in the city.
Yeah, weren't always beekeepers. So about 11 years or so ago, we were living in a suburban block. Vanessa's quite a keen gardener, interested in growing our food and doing what we could for a little bit of our own sustainability and food awareness. From that, looking at what we could do more on a suburban block, realised that beekeeping is something you can do here in Australia. Knew nothing about bees. Didn't even know the true importance of bees growing up in Australia, a little bit naive. So went and got ourselves educated in beekeeping with a local course through a club. From that, an addiction, like tattoos, some would say, starts at one. And then we do have some limits on hive density here. So we soon had 2 hives, and that's our limit for our size land. Looking at how we could then have a few more hives. A few friends, chefs in the industry, we thought the natural connection was food and food security, food supply, local produce. Contacted them about the possibility of putting a few hives out with their restaurants. Once we got a first couple off the ground, Melbourne food scene very much interested in what we were doing, were talking about us, and it kind of exploded around us. So what we thought would be a little weekend hobby of going and looking after our 5 or 6 hives in the first year turned into about 22, 24 hives. We started to continue to see the demand and then had to think about, do we change careers and become...
So you're working full time?
Yeah. So now we are. We weren't at the time. We were trying to maintain old jobs of IT and corporate life.
Yeah.
Realised that here's an opportunity. Let's have a go, see what happens, roll the dice.
Yeah, for sure, it's the way, isn't it? What part do bees play in the ecosystem?
Mostly their main role is for pollination. So pretty much probably about 60 to 70% of the food that we eat is relying on bee pollination.
60 to 70%?
Yeah, so especially things like stone fruits and lots of cherries, almonds, all sorts of, even, all of our pears, peaches. Life would be fairly boring looking, bland eating food really if you were to rely on just wind pollinated food. So their main role is specifically pollination, and honey's kind of one of the, I suppose, it's more of one of the secondary things that they create, and it's pretty much their food source for winter. So that's why bees collect nectar to make honey.
To make, and what's that honey for? What for them to eat?
Yeah, it's for them to
it
eat.
is. Yeah. So they are European honeybees. They're being prepared to be essentially snowed in for the whole of winter. So they collect the nectar during the season. They evaporate the moisture content down. Once it gets below about...
They evaporate the moisture by doing what?
So they keep the hive at 35 degrees all year round with
so
good airflow.
So it's like a reduction.
Yeah,
basically. Like
literally, they reduce it. And once it gets down to less than 20% moisture content, they put a wax capping over it and seal it.
How do they know it's 20%?
Because they're amazing.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And then...
They must smell it. They smell it and go,
literally.
well, this won't ferment, so
Yeah.
we're capping this. This is for storage.
Yeah, I was thinking more like, like your nana does a toffee and test it in the water.
Okay. Yeah,
like,
yep.
do they like get it on the legs and dip it in some, I don't know.
So not that we know of yet. We don't know the
Yeah.
method in which they detect the moisture content. But the reason they do it is when they reduce the moisture content, it's super high in sugar, which means high in acid, low in moisture content. It can't ferment with airborne yeast, which is alcohol is toxic to living organisms. So they're doing it to preserve their own food.
Amazing.
And that's what we call honey.
Yeah, far out. And then, so let's say you didn't take it. Would they stop making it? Like, how does it work? Like,
Well, honeybees specifically they're so industrious and productive, they will displace themselves. So it's a interesting question because it has been brought up with us beforehand. If humans didn't intervene and take their honey, then what would happen with the bees? Would they stop making it? I don't think that they would stop making. I think it's very instinctual for them to do. It's just that these particular bees that we do keep, they just produce excess. And it's in their genetics to do this.
Just keep going.
They just keep going, and they will manage that too by what we call swarming. They'll naturally divide, and they will just alleviate numbers out of that hive until they have what they determined as the appropriate amount of bees to maintain that colony.
So what will happen to the rest?
Well, the half that do swarm will leave with the old queen, and they'll build themselves a new colony somewhere. So in a hollow of a tree. Possum boxes are pretty popular in Australia.
So let's just break that down. I'm not 100% getting that.
Okay.
So you've got a hive, right? It's all good. And then you say they'll swarm. Like what makes them swarm?
It's
why would
an
they do?
instinctual thing. So springtime.
There's too many in there. Is that what you're saying?
This is one of. There's a couple of triggers, and
There's
that
a
is
couple
one.
of triggers. So one of the things is it's a seasonal thing. It's what, when chickens want to sit on eggs in spring, bees want to naturally divide because bees want to populate the world and keep their colonies going. So they'll naturally divide and go out and
Like
create.
humans.
And yeah, totally. They'll reproduce, so to speak. It's one of those things. As a beekeeper, if you're interested in collecting honey, you don't really want your bees to swarm because you want your army or your workforce to be whole. But it is a natural thing for them to want to do at certain times of the year. So as us beekeepers, we can manage that. I don't think we can prevent it, but it's something that we can help working with the bees to try and manage. So we can do things like, well, if you miss the swarm, you can go catch the swarm. So you can go chase. But a lot of beekeepers go chasing swarms,
like storm chasers.
Kind of, basically. Yeah. Springtime is the time of year all the beekeepers are out looking in trees going, where are those bees? So we can also artificially divide the hive to help alleviate that urge that they want to.
So it's almost like we're too big. We're having a bit of a fallout. I want to get all my mates. We're going to go and start our own little.
So they've reached their critical mass, and especially if once they're out of room, and if they have stores on board, they're doing the calculations, and they believe that they're also doing long range weather forecasts about how long the winter will also be, and so then they're deciding, we can afford to lose half of the colony, and. What is now also known with bees is the queen doesn't make any decisions of the colony. It is a true democratic process amongst all the workers. The queen is purely there to lay eggs, and they keep her happy to keep her laying. So the workers decide what's happening. The workers will decide that we need to divide. They will then take an egg, make a new queen cell out of it, and just before that new queen emerges, her pheromones start to become quite active. The old queen can smell that there's a new queen coming. If she hangs around, there will be a fight to the death, and youth usually will win.
Like lions or
so
whatever,
the
yeah.
old queen then says, all right, all my loyalists, let's go. And
Also, generally the new queen takes over that
so the
hive.
old queen leaves and takes the loyalists, and new queen then emerges and runs the old hive.
Yeah, so there's various reasons why they want to do that. Yeah, like what Matt just said, a new queen. They want to make a new queen because queens need to be young. They need to have a lot of pheromone, and if the old queen is starting to not lay as many eggs,
Or not
she's
as
not
quality.
she's
Yeah.
not
So that's the
emitting
other
a strong
side.
enough pheromone for them, the workers will decide to basically oust her.
Bloody hell. And then you were saying there about the something to do with the egg, like you make a queen
Yeah.
egg, is that
Yeah.
right? So what's like how does that work? Do you know?
Yep. So all of the bees we see out in the field in the garden are female workers. So when the queen lays an egg, she'll feel with her antenna the size of the cell, and if it's a normal brood size cell for a worker, the queen will then fertilize the egg as she lays it. If it's a larger cell for a male drone, she will lay the egg unfertilized. So within the first 3 days before the egg hatches, it's in royal jelly that the workers excrete to feed the eggs. Once a egg hatches and becomes a larvae, its diet changes to what we call bee bread, which is a mixture of nectar and pollen. If they were to take one of those eggs within its first 3 days while it's still on royal jelly, move it into so the bees will actually literally remove it from a normal cell, create a vertical bigger cell, and then continue to feed that royal jelly through the whole way through its larva and pupation stage, it will then develop full functioning ovaries. So it's exactly the same egg as all of the female workers. It's just had a different diet, and it allows it to develop as a full functional queen.
Phenomenal. So they effectively make it, like you said, they make it. Yeah.
So, like, for example, if, say, something happens and the queen
That-
dies.
Why is that queen not like, hang on a minute, what are they doing over there? Like, do you know what I mean?
literally.
Like, hang on a minute, there's
Yeah.
something fishy going on around here.
And the workers will, at times, hide those queen cells and huddle around to protect it. So
So the queen can't stop it.
So because the queen still does have a stinger, she doesn't have a barbed stinger like the normal worker bees that we know do. So one of the things that can happen is, for example, supersedure cells. So the workers will make many queens as insurance policy for a failing queen, and then once the first queen emerges, there can be numbers of other queens that are sitting there in their cells ready to emerge, that were all kind of made at the same time. So it can be minutes, hours, within days of all them emerging. And what usually happens is the new queen that's out will make a piping noise, a high-pitched chirp. The queens that are in their cells almost ready to emerge can't help themselves but to respond to that queen piping noise, and then that queen will then go around and stab them all to death in their cell before they emerge.
Yeah,
so
it's pretty brutal.
If it's multiple caste swarms, so if the colony's just got so large, in that case the workers will protect those second and third and fourth queens and stop the new queen being able to get to them. So the old queen will have left with some workers. The young new queen has come out. She knows there's other queens there, but she can't get to them because they're being protected. So then she realizes I'm a caste. I'm for a caste swarm. So then she'll grab as many loyalists and she'll leave. So you can have 4 or 5 swarms easily at a time.
So they'll just alleviate the numbers until they've worked out the maths of how many they actually want left. But they've got literally they have all the resources they need. They can make a queen on demand pretty much. If, say, for instance, she fatally dies or something happens to her, they can instantly kind of go to an egg that's less than 3 days old and they can draw out a queen cell and create another queen.
With how quickly?
A queen can emerge in about 16 days.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So what would happen within that 16 days? Is there like a general or someone that just says, I'll look after, is that...
Well, the bees themselves are probably going to be a bit. They'll be definitely watching their numbers because it's all about critical mass. They'll be going backwards quite a lot within that 16 days before the new queen comes out. The thing is, the new queen will come out and she still needs to mate. So it could be it could be a month, and depending on the weather, if it's rainy, she might not be able to do a mating flight, so she might be stuck inside for a bit longer. So the bees themselves only live to about 6 to 8 weeks, so they are dramatically going backwards in their numbers, and they need to get back on top of that. So the queen can lay up to 2,000 eggs a day.
Jesus.
Yeah, so it's all about mass.
Yeah, man. A mating flight. What's a mating flight?
So it's well, the queen will leave the colony. She'll pretty much, well, we don't know 100%, but it is fairly common knowledge amongst beekeepers that the queen will leave for an initial flight where she goes to meet a whole heap of drones, which is in some kind of congregation area. So basically the pub where the boys all hang out.
Yeah.
And she'll go and meet with the guys down there, and she'll have numerous mating sessions with many, many drones. And then she's pretty much got enough eggs for her to lay her whole entire life.
So that's one night?
So off one night, she'll hold enough sperm inside her to be able to, so fertilise up to 2,000 eggs a day for up to 4+ years, they believe.
So she can live a long, long time.
Yeah, that's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And how many different species of bees are there? Because I see the bees here are a lot different than the bees that I see in England, like the bumblebees. You know, like the big.
You guys got the black bee, the buckfast as well. Those kinds of bees.
Yeah, well, so we don't have the bumblebees here on the mainland. Tasmania does have them, so they do, and they're what we call a solitary bee. So honeybees are.
So they don't produce honey, them ones.
No, they live. Well, no, they don't store it. No, they basically live from day to day. They might congregate and hang out with other bumblebees overnight, but they actually don't create a hive like
where
the honeybees
where will
do.
they sleep? Just
like native bees, they sleep in all sorts of places, undersides of plants. They sleep in, sometimes they have little hollows, sometimes they get into in between bricks and mortar, in walls of places, all sorts of all sorts of different places that they can congregate. In Australia, we have about 1,900 different species of bees, of native bees. We do have a handful of bees that are native that potentially can create or make honey, but they only pretty much make small amounts of honey. We keep honeybees mainly because they are, I suppose, considered our agricultural, our pollinator angels who do all of, pollination for food. And the reason why beekeepers keep honeybees is because they create more surplus than any other bees.
Yeah, they do say that the European honeybee is the world's most efficient pollinator. So that is why we use it.
But there's been lots of recent studies that do show that the native bees also do pollination for us, but it's just trying to work out. We've had so much of a focus on honeybees that the native bees are starting to get looked into now as to how their importance as well. So we have up in New South Wales and Queensland the Trigona bees, which are native, and a lot of people are now keeping them as well, which is great to see because, as much as I love honeybees, or there's, their proper name being Apis mellifera, I really do think that all pollinators are important, and especially our native pollinators. So, we can't forget about them. So in Victoria, we have things like those little blue banded bees. You might see them in the garden. You find them pollinating tomato plants. They love basil and herbs and things like that as well. But they're what we call buzz pollinators. So they're they're basically a headbangers. They're vibration. They shake the actual flowers to help pollinate it, where honeybees are a little bit more, they'll go in there and they'll selectively touch everything and crawl over everything, which then they transfer and move to something else. So they spread it that way.
I see they're always lavender. You know, there's a few people got lavender. The lavender's always getting hammered. Is that the like? Do they love lavender? Or something?
Yeah, I mean they do. They have honeybees have preferences as well. So, but they do specifically like that color. The blues, the purples, they are very much attracted to.
What is the structure of a colony? Like you said, you've got the queen, the workers. Is there other jobs for people to do?
Yeah, totally. So generally, bees will do their job according to their age. So most of the time, what actually happens is if you come out to be a worker bee, which is a female, you will mostly go into your first job will be nursing duties. So that'll be feeding other larvae and doing jobs inside the hive. So they actually don't start to come out to learn how to fly until they're about 2 weeks old. So generally it happens between about 11 and 2 to 3 o'clock in the day. If you've got a colony of bees in your backyard, what you'll find is you'll start to see they kind of like come out of the front entrance and start crawling up the hive and kind of flying off and then coming back to the entrance. That is what us beekeepers call orientation flights, and that was pretty much them learning how to fly. But there's all sorts of roles in the hive. There's like funeral duties where you'll basically pick up bees that might die inside the colony and like they'll be taken out the front door and dumped. There's other jobs where, like, for example, bees who are scout bees, so bees who go out and find new nectar sources or new homes for potential swarms. Studies have shown that those kinds of bees they're more spirited and more adventurous than some of the others. So they do kind of have personalities as well.
So they're going to find new plots, like a new flower bed or a new...
Yep. So they'll go out and find new nectar sources and they'll come home to the colony.
Adventurers, yeah.
Yeah, they're basically...
Cook.
Yep. They go out and find those and they come back to the colony and they will do a dance to demonstrate where that nectar source is to the other workers.
So, essentially that's all done with what we call the waggle dance. It's done in the darkness inside the hive, so it's all done via a looping dance in a figure of 8 with a vibration through the middle of it. And the way that it's danced on the frame and where the bees are all around feeling it, is in relation to north, and that is showing direction from the sun. And then the amount of times they go around and the intensity of the vibrations on it is them explaining to the other bees how much energy to expend to get to the destination, which is measuring the distance. So they can tell you angle and distance, and they know that they're pretty much on.
Is that one bee would be doing that, or would that be like a group of bees who've gone out together, or is it?
So when the scouts come back, there's multiple scouts that'll all scout different things, and it's when they come back, they go through a democratic process of selling what they found, and they get one chance to show what they've found, and that's it. And it's up to the rest of the colony to make it then a democratic process.
Yours is great, you know.
We're not sure what you're selling.
That's
but
amazing.
The same thing happens when they swarm. So basically when they're hanging in a big bunch in springtime, a scout will go out, or various scouts will go out and go and find new places to potentially live, and they have to come back. They'll come back to the swarm, and they will do that. They run through the swarm and basically sell the new potential home. And unlike our politicians, they only get one chance. And then if they don't want it, that's it. You know, you've had your chance. Let somebody else come and sell us something else.
That's amazing. They're amazing, aren't they? What you're saying about the species? The species. Do they don't mix, do they? Or is it always just one? You know, you say there's so many species. Do they all stick together? Do you know? Does that make sense? Is it mixed race? Is what I'm trying to get at. I guess.
In one colony or out in the field?
In one colony. Yeah,
No, in one colony it is just Apis. Well, so what we're talking about is European honeybees, Apis mellifera. Yeah. They will stick together. We see Asian bees as well. They can be kept in a hive and they do produce honey. That's Apis cerana, but they won't live co-live in a hive together. We do see in the field though, honeybees are not competitive. We see blue-banded bees and European honeybees on the same flower, all working together.
In actual fact, I saw a video that somebody had put up somewhere on a social platform, and it was a bunch of Aussie native bees giving a honeybee a hard time. Yeah, like these little ones. They would the honeybee was trying to get into this flower, right? And these little trigonas were like knocking this honeybee out, going, get out of here. So, you know, everybody talks about honeybees and them potentially displacing natives. I think the natives can look after themselves quite well.
Yeah, okay. What kind of distance will they travel?
Okay, so generally, observations have said that they travel up to about 5 kilometres from the hive. Some people say that in urban environments that they don't need to travel as far, which is why they potentially may live a bit longer. But in the country, they can travel up to 8. I don't know. I haven't measured.
Yeah.
They do say, they can travel for up to 5 kilometres comfortably to find food and return in the same day.
You know, it's a far old distance to walk, you know.
For their size.
Yeah, exactly. You know, like to walk 5K and back, you're like, I did a 5K walk today.
We worked it out, their size compared to a human size. We were working bees one day and we were going through the maths of it in conversation, me and one of our beekeeper friends. We worked out our ratio of our rough size and mass compared to a bee's, and then worked out if we scaled up the distance, the 5Ks that they can travel, and scaled it up to a human size. I think it's us to the moon twice and back in one day, which is insane.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, because we're basically virtually nothing. Like, look at the way, you know. Yeah. How much honey does one bee produce?
One bee?
Ooh, in its lifetime? There is there's a saying that goes around that says one bee in its entire lifetime will produce half a teaspoon of honey?
It might even be an eighth of a teaspoon.
We'll have to check that fact.
Okay. Yeah. I heard
it's half. A fraction of a teaspoon.
Yeah. And that's 8 weeks. Was it 8 weeks?
Yeah.
Yeah, in 8 weeks. So it's not much, is it? Let's be honest.
It's like millions and millions of flowers to go visit. Yeah. And they're not just collecting honey, they're collecting pollen too. So they've got little baggies that they have on their little sacks on their legs that they bring home pollen as well.
And what do they do with that?
So pollen is their protein and nectar is their carbohydrates. So they have a combination. They have
well-balanced diet.
They do. They have a well-balanced diet. But pollen is one of their triggers for the beginning of the season. So when you start keeping bees, you notice you get obsessed and then you keep on watching them. You're watching them coming in and out the entrance, seeing what they're doing. This time of the year, they start to bring copious amounts of pollen back to the hive, and that is their trigger for them to start breeding up because they mix the pollen in with the nectar to feed the young. Oh, Matt's got some facts here. A single worker bee produces about 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey.
So basically nothing, isn't it? Let's be honest.
It's fairly minimal, yeah.
Especially when you're putting like a tablespoon on your toes.
Yeah, totally right. And we should really, honour and respect it because they do work so hard. But when you think about it, a colony, in the height of the season, say in summertime, you could have up to about 50,000 bees in a hive. So it's pretty big. And then that's when they build up. And then they'll also, in wintertime, they're pretty much down to about, 10 to 20,000.
Bloody hell.
So they do reduce themselves a lot. And it depends on how much they've potentially collected throughout the season and what their stores are like.
So in the winter, they're just inside the hive?
In Australia, they do quite a lot of foraging. You will see bees flying on, say, 13, 14 degree days. So a day like today, they will be out and about if there are sources for them to go and collect from. But yeah, they do like to warm up a bit, but they will fly.
But generally there will be in there. The majority will be.
The majority
yeah.
of the bees are,
Absolutely,
inside the hive.
And they're maintaining that temperature
Because they're
still,
maintaining warmth.
Yeah, I was gonna. Yeah, how did they shut the front door, or what did they? Or did
They
they just
will-
huddle?
Well, actually, yeah, it's a good point. Shutting the front door. So bees, another thing that bees actually do collect is propolis, so tree resins.
Oh, yeah.
And they'll use that to embalm things in the hive. So if a small mouse was to get in or insects get in that they do manage to kill or protect themselves from, rather than it then rotting and bringing bacteria into the hive, they'll entomb it or embalm it in propolis. But they also use that resin and propolis.
Have you found that before?
Yeah, we collect that's the stuff that stains our suits and makes our gloves sticky more so than the honey. Being a resin oil based, it's hard to wash out. It is also they're antifungal and it also provides antimicrobial for them. So they use it as a bit of a medicine cabinet, they believe, but they also plug up drafts and shut their doorway down in winter so they can manage and control temperature.
Yeah, amazing. I see. Did you ever watch that Attenborough thing where there was, I think it was like Japanese bees or Asian bees?
Ah, yeah, with
Against
the hornet.
Yeah, the hornet, and,
Yeah.
and they all got around it and shook it or something.
Yep.
So
Because it's within a degree difference of they can live to, and so the bees will warm it up, and once it dies, they've quickly got to jump off because they've got to, I think, 1 or 2 degrees before they'll die, so they have to jump off and cool down really
amazing.
quickly.
Just there, that hornet obliterated.
Oh my God. It'd be like land of the giant coming in,
Yeah,
right?
it's like that, and they were just destroying them, wasn't it? How important is different pollen? Is it nectar? To like you say, vary of diet. You're saying they like to have a nice balance of diet. So is it like strawberry plants and tomato plants? Is that important?
Definitely. Diversity is really important to bees. It leads to them having, we talked about a balanced diet, and it's good for honeybee health. Like there are certain pollens that are, there's the scale of nutritional value of pollen, and some pollens are a better value for them than others. Some of the eucalypts are good, but some of the eucalypts are not very nutritional for them. A lot of the European plants are very much so because they're European honeybees.
So like you said about the native bees, they're like more the native plants. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. Okay.
Yep. And that's also why they've discovered that especially our native eucalypts, are such abundant producers of nectar and pollen, is because our native bees aren't as efficient as the European honeybee. So they've evolved to put out copious amounts of nectar and pollen in order to get other marsupials and even birds to help with pollination.
I see.
And so when European honeybees got here after the first fleet came and said we need pollinators, send them across, European honeybees got here and saw what the native eucalypts were doing and must have thought it was absolutely amazing. And that's why Australia is then one of the best honey producers in the world.
Is it? Australia's one of the best honey producers in the world?
We produce a lot of honey. Going back to the pollen, though, I really think that's why places like suburbia and our cities and our peri-urban spaces are really, really good places to keep bees, because it helps with a varied diet for them.
Because different people are planting different things in their gardens.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's not like one big field of
monoculture.
whatever.
Monoculture is an issue for not just bees, but in general. Monoculture, almonds we're seeing at the minute where it's bigger than
Monoculture means
one plantation. So we've got around Robinvale our almond plantations, which are enormous, uncomprehendable fields of almonds. Farms so big that go for kilometres in different directions.
That the bees can't even outfly.
So if
they're stuck in the middle of there, all they're getting is that.
all they're getting is almond pollen, nectar,
Yeah.
what the almond trees are producing, but it's only for that short window of flowering. So as a beekeeper, you need to make sure that they're healthy before they come in, and that they're flowering when you put them out, or they're about to flower within a day or two, and then you go and get your bees back out within a day or two, because as soon as there's not enough food, they're going to go backwards.
So you're lending your bees, is that what you're saying?
That's a pollination service that some beekeepers provide.
Oh, okay.
The other concern is with pollination, what we have seen with science is when we have such a large crop that you can get evolution of pests and diseases that will then run through giant crops like that. So that's when we used to have companion planting and things like that that looked after that, and diversity. With lack of diversity in monoculture, we're much more prone to diseases and pests, and therefore on monoculture we see heavy pesticide usage, and again that's going to affect bees and humans.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's not only that. It's just like, for example, we've got just now the almonds have been pollinated, and the demand for the amount of bees to come in to do that is, we're talking about, so beekeepers have come from all over the country to the almond fields, and we're talking about 160, 180,000 beehives being brought in on trucks.
Which each one holds 50,000.
Not yet, because it's the beginning of the season.
Sorry, yeah.
They're pretty much
30, 20,
They're pretty much like they're small. They're smaller in size, but they're coming in to sit in the almond fields for 4 to 6 weeks, and then they get moved out. So the other issue you've got is, because bees are, especially honeybees, are very social, you've got potential transference of diseases as well. So there's bee diseases as well that can potentially, be, say, for example, jumping out of a Queensland hive into a Victorian hive, and the Victorian hives come back down, say, we'll just say the peninsula, and then you potentially can, spread disease amongst the local ones.
They don't have the whatever it is to fix them, maybe, that they might have in Queensland or something.
Yeah, so for example, there's small hive beetle, which is a pest to the bees. Now, we didn't have that in Victoria 4 or 5 years ago, but we do have it now. And we don't want to point fingers, but we suspect it's come from the almonds and the bees.
Yeah, they believe
up in
it
there.
came through almond pollination from Queensland down to Victoria because of the mass congregation of pollination hives.
Yeah,
And they just jump in a couple of Victorian hives and off they went.
Oh, the
mites.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is annoying.
So it's frustrating because as a suburban beekeeper,
Yeah.
who doesn't do any migratory beekeeping, it's like, don't do that. But I do understand the importance of because we need them for the pollination, and it's just such a huge mass congregation. You do start to question. You wonder about the way in which we are producing our food, and you start to think about, well, why don't they have other things? Why can't they incorporate farms that have their own pollinators that actually reside there all year round?
If your farm is so big that you need to bring pollinators in to pollinate your crop, should you not then think about looking after your own pollinators, and then you will start to respect the bees a little bit more?
Is what you're saying, right?
Creating environments where they can thrive and they can live and they can exist.
So every 20 tree plant something else. Is that what you said?
Well, just if you own a farm so big that you need to annually call in pollination services for your crops, you should potentially learn to look after your own pollinators, because it's part of your crop cycle that you need.
But like you say, that you wouldn't be able to just have, because it's just almonds that can't fly any further. They'd have to mix plant. Is that
there
right?
would be some kind of companion planting or some other adjoining kind of farms that have other things that the bees can go onto, because it's pretty stressful for beekeepers most of the time they bring in really healthy, strong colonies, and by the time they leave, the colonies need to be built back up again because they're weak.
I've heard about them getting stolen. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, it happens a lot. It happens often. A lot of beekeepers now kind of microchip their hives with GPS stuff. Not all, but it's really unfortunate, because they'll either take the bees or they take the honey from the bees and kind of trash the hives and stuff like that, which is awful.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
What's the health benefits of honey?
Health benefits, okay. Scientifically proven health benefits or just general anecdotal evidence? It depends. Okay, so
I hear of hay fever. That's the one you hear a lot of.
So hay fever is that, a lot of people, we have got cappings honey, which is basically all the honeycomb that we shave off our frames that we mix all together from all our hives around Melbourne that has a lot of pollen content and raw honey. So the thing is with honey is, as long as it hasn't been heat treated, there is some nutritional value in it. If the honey has been heat treated, say over about 40 degrees, you're looking at, in effect, pasteurizing it.
So a bit more commercial, you're saying, right?
Yeah. So you're actually killing the antimicrobial content of the honey.
Yeah.
But it does have antifungal properties.
Being looked at, or being actually actively used to even dress staph wounds. It's shown to be very effective for burns because it allows moisture retention and some sort of breathability as well. So it has been beneficial for
Is
burns.
that because it's hygroscopic?
You're not sure the exact reason as to why it's so good for burns, but it's been shown to be very promising. So some of these resistant bugs that it's being used to treat. And in general, we know a lot of, farmers and even vets who will use it on animal wounds, so people using it on cattle wounds to dress wounds, keep bacteria and things out. But we do have a vet that does use our product on animals with hay fever.
Hay fever, yeah. So going back to the hay fever thing, so the idea of it is having, a little bit of the allergen that you have issues with.
Yeah.
A lot of people seem to, both of us don't suffer hay fever, so I don't have any evidence for
I
my
mean,
own.
terribly.
You do terribly?
Yeah, terribly.
But we do believe, a lot of people have told us that it does really work. Whether it is the placebo effect, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe it does for some and not for others. Who knows?
Yeah, totally. So if you have an allergy that is generated from a pollen from a tree, not pollen as in grass pollen, it won't work for grass pollen because bees don't visit, grass and collect pollen from grasses. So people are. There was a news story a couple of years ago on it, where we had somebody who used our honey, and who was shouting around, going how amazing it was, and they put it on the news. It was after that thunderstorm asthma that we had.
It wiped a few people out, didn't it?
Yeah, people went crazy over trying to get their hands on local honey because it can be, very frustrating if you suffer from it. It can be. People don't want to have to take all the medication and pills all the time. So
it's not cheap either. Them pills are
no,
expensive.
not at all. But the idea of it is ingesting a little bit of the allergen. Some people take generally about a teaspoon of it every day in the season to help with that.
The other thing is, if you're going to use it instead of sugar, like in your tea or in other things like that,
well, it was our original sweetener.
Sweetener, yeah. Instead of getting that crap sugar, you're better off just putting a teaspoon.
All of those fancy European desserts that we're familiar with now all originated with honey. So even baklava and your Turkish delights, all those kinds of things. All originally with honey, and now you try and find some of those old recipes and how to use the honey in it, and it can be a bit tricky. So it does work a little bit differently than normal sugar in cooking, and once you get your head around that, then definitely it's an easy replacement.
You hear a lot about the honey in the supermarkets being glucose or just not even obviously glucose is not even honey, but and the branding it and labeling it incorrectly or at the conning you, or so what's the go with all that?
Read your labels when you're buying a product.
And what should you be looking for when you do read the labels?
Now, this is a tricky one, right? Because we've just recently, as we all know, as being small producers, we've all had the new labelling laws come in.
Yeah, percentage of Australian and that.
You want 100% Australian honey. If you can buy it, just buy from a local beekeeper at a farmer's market or somewhere on the side of the road, or get in touch with. There's actually a honey map that you can access that has a whole heap of local beekeepers all around the whole of the country, where you can avoid kind of supermarket. The problem is there's a lot of honey laundering that goes on throughout the whole world. So
did you just say honey laundering?
Yeah. Every industry has their issues, and ours is the laundering of honey. So basically blending honey. And sometimes not even honey itself, which is where you came in with the glucose syrup. All sorts of things have been found in honey around the world.
So, sorry to interrupt you. I just want to make sure we get this right. So what they'll do, they'll take a percentage of honey, which is actually honey, and they'll just bulk it up with glue. Is that what you're saying?
Generally, yes, but there's even places that in China where you can send a sample of real honey and they can artificially make it
Laboratory
in a
identically.
lab.
They'll take it apart through mass spectrometers and things, show you all the individual components and make you an artificial version of it that is chemically identical. And we get emails about that all the time, offering to do that for us. So,
Sounds like a great idea. You know?
yeah, but one of the things that you're like we kind of get people to think about is having talked about how efficient the pollinators are and our flora here in Australia and being a huge and an amazing honey producing country. You need to think about, if you are looking at the label and it's not 100% Australian honey, why on earth would we need to be in a position where you're buying an imported honey product when we are one of the biggest producers and a huge exporter? And that's when we see some of those giant companies that do control the market and the pricing of the market that will export our quality honey, import cheaper honey for our own citizens. And so, yeah, it just seems so ironic and crazy that we would be satisfied eating the inferior product that they're importing for us and exporting the better
That's
stuff.
because our labelling laws are lax and you only need to have 51% of the entire product to be Australian to call it Australian. Yeah.
Is that even with the new law?
I think the new law is trying to to try and stop that.
So you can write Australian, but then you've still got to have
Yeah,
it, and then
yeah.
it can be like 51%.
Yeah,
Or
but
they
without
can
that,
let
so that's the new
but
fuel
your scale's
gauge.
only half coloured in, right?
Yeah.
But without that, what we call the fuel gauge on the side of the label, under the traditional laws, if they said Australian, all they needed to do is have 51% of an Australian product in there.
That's ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems crazy. The other issue we've got is the rest of the world has the parasitic mite varroa, which the honeybees are suffering worldwide. We are the only country in the world, including, well, even New Zealand has it. We're the only country in the world that doesn't have this varroa mite. So every beekeeper, or not every beekeeper, but the majority of beekeepers worldwide each season treat their hives with miticides. So it's a insecticide that doesn't kill the honeybee but does help kill the mites. So technically there's a lot of honey out worldwide that has got antibiotics in it. Majority of it is in the wax, not in the honey, but still the honey is not clean and not pure. And so that's when you got laundering coming in as well. So for example, in Chinese honey being laundered all through the States and all through Southeast Asia and all through into Australia, you've got that problem as well. There needs to be more stringent testing on it. And the thing is,
On the actual honey.
on the actual honey itself, and importing, they do try and test, but they're obviously not going to test everything that's coming into the country. The other thing is, well, when you're actually ultra filtering honey, so heating honey and filtering honey. When you ultra filter honey, you're also potentially removing the pollen, right? The pollen is the thing that needs to be in the honey to be able to trace the honey to find its source. So some people will argue that if you ultra filter honey, then it has no pollen, then can you call it honey? And that's how I think there's a lot of laundering thing. That's how laundering happens too. So there's been recently a Netflix series on food and some industries and the corruption laundering that goes on through that called Rotten.
Yeah.
One of them was on honey. So if any of your listeners are interested, go check that out because that talks about the Chinese honey being laundered through America.
It's unbelievable. You wouldn't. You would never know. You would never know, would you?
Yeah.
People who go into supermarkets, which I hate anyway, to be totally honest. But they're going to go there and they think they're doing the right thing because they write organic on it and all that as well. And they try and trick you. And the mums are trying to do the right thing.
So organic's interesting. So this is something I like to talk about is organic honey. So we talking before 5 kilometres, we know a bee can comfortably fly. 5 kilometre radius of a circle gives us an area of about 36,000 acres. So you need to know in the 36,000 acres around your beehive that no one's using any pesticide or any chemical to be able to be classed as organic. So I don't know that that's as...
You'd have to knock on every door.
Yeah,
Excuse me.
I get a bit sceptical about organic labelling.
Yeah, especially, that's all. I never ever thought. That's a really good point. Really good point.
Yeah.
So what is the process from the bee to the toast?
There's a big there's a few steps in there from bee to toast. Although you could take your toast to the beehive, and that would be pretty easy. You could so the easy way is to take your toast to the hive, open up a hive, get a honey frame, and just take the caps off the honeycomb and just spread it on your bread. That'd be the easiest if you're a beekeeper. You
Ready to go?
Potentially do that.
If you were to do that and you take the caps off, would you then, you'd have to drain it, or could you just put it straight back and they would recap it for you?
It would start weeping, and the bees are very, very ultra clean freaks, so they would clean all of that up, restore it, recap it, and clean and just fix everything, all the damage you've just done. So there is some hive manipulation you can do by doing what you're doing. You can scratch some frames to get the bees, to move honey from one place of the hive to the other. So at times, the bees naturally keep their brood, their babies, in the lower section of the hive and the honey above. And in the middle frames, we try and create or have the bees create a division on those frames. So we're just taking pure frames of honey out, and at times we'll go into the hive and there'll be a mixed frame. And so we can gently sometimes scratch those cappings and get those cappings to weep. The bees then will open those cappings up, clean all those frames out, move the honey up, because that's naturally where they're putting the honey, is above the brood, and essentially clean that frame out, get it ready to put more brood in, and they've moved the honey upstairs, and then we've got them to fix things up for us a little bit.
So going back to how do you basically, what's the process? So there's a honey, I suppose there's a honey season with bees. Generally where we are, so all our bees are stationary, so they don't move. We don't go chase flowers like a lot of traditional beekeepers do. So all of our honey is what we call, in effect, garden honey or polyfloral honey, so from many different sources, right? So season-wise, we have a spring, summer, and an autumn harvest here in Melbourne. We don't do generally no winter harvesting, but if the warmer states do. So we go into our hives, and this time of the year we're getting ready for spring, which means we're pretty much hot on keeping an eye on the bees to see what they're doing, because they start to expand their nest. Once they start bringing in extra nectar, they start storing it. So they'll start storing it in what Matt said, the honey frames, which are generally up above their brood nest. So we'll go in there as beekeepers, and once we know that the overnight temperatures are kind of a little bit more stable, they're not too cold, we can start to look towards taking honey from the bees. So in each of the hives that we have, there's a set of frames. In those frames, if the majority of the honeycomb frames are all capped, so we, as a general rule, we don't take any frames out of the hives unless they're about 80-90% capped. And that's what we mentioned before about the fermentation. So as long as that's okay, it's safe to take that honey from them. So we take that.
Capped means it's finished.
Capped means it's like
it's
what
done,
what you see in honeycomb, which is complete wax cappings over the honeycomb. So if they're open, they're not finished. So the caps are completely
not reduced.
not reduced. So the caps are completely sealed. We take those honey frames away, and we, in effect, there's a few different methods. You can, if you're a hobbyist, you might crush and strain that. So you could actually, in effect, cut the honeycomb out and just simply strain it, crush it and strain it through filters. It can be some cloth or just mesh. We ourselves, what we do is we shave those cappings off. So we cut the cappings off and we spin the frames. So we extract the honey that way. So we spin it out into a big vessel, and we basically simply filter it, and That's it. That's all we do with
And
the
then
honey.
put that back in with all
The frames
Yeah, the
themselves.
frames go
so
back
the
in
frames
empty.
go back to the bees. They go and clean them, and then they restore. We don't take the actual honeycomb away from our hives because for us, we don't produce, because the importance of our project has always been about the looking after the bees and ensuring that they have what they need firstly. We don't take honeycomb from our hives very often at all because we see it as kind of counterproductive.
You'd have to build more of that. Is that what you're saying?
Well, because the thing is they need to eat approximately 8 kilos of honey to make 1 kilo of wax because they can secrete it on demand themselves. So they produce and they make all the honeycomb themselves. Some people will argue, like, you know those new hives that people have been keeping, the flow hives where you've
We
got the
twist
tap,
it.
right?
Yeah, yeah. Is that I was going to ask you about that. Is that good?
Yeah, depends on what camp you're sitting on. But beekeepers will swear that honey from the flow hive tastes different to honey that has been spun. Now, I don't know if that's true. I think it's because I think the wax component plays a part of it. And if you don't have the wax, then you don't get that extra, that the flavour's different.
That's what I would definitely say, 100%. If something is made, exactly that. I couldn't explain it any better. But if it's stored in plastic or if it's stored in wax, well, therefore for me it makes sense.
So therefore, from a purist point of view, we're saying that the flow being a plastic frame and not getting some of those flavours imparted from the wax, that it isn't a pure bee honey because you're lacking some of those flavours that make up those components. So it's like...
it's missing like 10%.
Like making wine and storing it in a stainless steel vat without any oak in it and saying, here's our wine. It's missing that character that makes wine.
That last little percent.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. What changes the colour?
Different nectars and different pollens. So definitely there's been some interesting cases overseas, especially where bees have managed to get themselves into a local M&M's factory, and one also was in a Marancello cherry factory.
The cherry. Yeah.
And so they had green honey in one hive and some bright blood red honey in another hive.
And blue honey.
Yeah, blue honey.
From the M&Ms.
Yeah. So we've seen, different things. Yeah, so definitely the nectars play a major role in that. But we do see we see different coloured pollens coming into the hive, and some of that is pigment. So essentially
like
that
it goes from green, blue, white, red,
That's pretty
orange.
cool.
Yeah. There's even some glow-in-the-dark honey.
Is there really?
Yeah. So there's a species of...
Sweet Bassaria.
Sweet Bassaria that the nectar will fluoresce under UV light.
Yeah. I used to go to raves back in the 90s.
Yeah, you'd love it, right?
White gloves on and the UV and the rest of
And
it.
we've seen it with our own eyes. We had a fellow beekeeper come to one of our local clubs and she brought along her honey and, we all turned the lights off and sure enough, you could see fluorescent all through the honey jar.
Yeah, it just streaks through it here and there of where the Bassaria is,
That's a direct. Do you know what I mean? You can see that's actually there, so it's actually brought that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. And you say about bringing the suburbs are a great place for bees because of all the different species of flowers and all the rest of it. Why, would they normally be here, or do they do you know what I mean? You're bringing them in. I guess some people might get worried about that.
Yeah. There's always, there will be bees anyway in the environment. Like, for example, people often ask us about bees in the city, and a lot of people say, well, they're your bees, but there is bees there anyway. There's bees in hollows and trees in botanic gardens. They're around anyway.
The start, because at that time, it was before the massive spike in interest of bees. So we were basically at the crest of that wave. And so when we were starting, we realised pretty early on that there was a massive educational component involved in what we were doing, because at the time, councils still saw bees as a pest and they would exterminate bee swarms. We hadn't caught on to the importance of bees in our food security and food supply that especially Europe had, and America then was seeing colony collapse disorder, those kinds of things. We were still just totally oblivious to all of that. And throughout our journey of what we were doing, we've seen a very, very big shift in people's acceptance of bees. Now people are truly embracing what we're doing, and even what we're doing or without what we're doing, they're just embracing bees in general, full stop.
Like you say, education.
Yeah, I mean, if we need to look at our cities, if we want to move forward and see greener, more sustainable cities, pollinators play a huge role in that. And even if you want to grow your own fruit and veg in your backyard, balcony, whatever kind of space you've got, you need them around because otherwise you won't have any food. So
I think that's such an important point. Like the input that forget the honey.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
totally.
Like that's kind of like a little Brucey bonus. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The real thing that we should be worried about is the pollination of all the other food that we need.
Yeah.
Like
it's the food security, right?
Yeah.
That's the important
and
thing.
as we grow, we all know this. We're getting educated.
I think
everywhere.
one of the last lots of figures that came in the Australian industry of honey the bees versus honey industry, pollination at last count was, I think, is about $8.3 billion that bees contribute to in pollination.
So let's just wait. So that's 8.3 billion worth of food that's getting sold.
That is pollinated by bees,
yeah.
versus the honey industry is worth about 150 million.
Right, exactly. So it's like a drop in the ocean. Isn't it?
Yeah. So we see the honey as a byproduct of a healthy and happy hive.
Something happened. I read somewhere in 2007. Was there?
So there was that the CCD, colony collapse disorder.
Yeah, maybe.
So worldwide, bees were disappearing and they didn't know why.
Yeah.
And so it was coined CCD. There was a lot of mystery because I think from memory in America, basically beekeepers were coming to their hives and there was like no evidence of the bees even being there. It wasn't like they were all dead from contamination or they were just like disappearing. So that's where I believe that term was coined from. But it was with the beginning of people starting to wonder, what are these contributing factors to the decline in bee pollination, not bee pollination, in bee colonies? As a general rule, most beekeepers, I mean, we don't really want to accept any losses over winter, but generally what happens is beekeepers come back from winter and go, oh yeah, well, I lost X amount of hives. Hives, yes. So generally there would be an allowance of, it would be acceptable to maybe lose between 5 to 10% of your hives. But throughout this CCD period, there was beekeepers were losing like 50% of their bees, which was unacceptable for their role in pollination, right?
Exactly.
So that's why the world started to get really quite worried. I mean, in some countries, like for example Switzerland, the one winter they lost 80% of their bees. So humans should be worried when that happens, right?
Because if that does happen, like you say, like especially it's at the end of the season, so it's not like you can get prepared for it or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like,
in Australia, like we breed a lot of bees and we export a lot of bees to other countries.
Do we?
Yeah, loads and loads of bees to America. It's big business.
What's the price for bee these days?
A single bee.
So they come as a nucleus hive. You can buy them in a couple different formats. Some people sell packaged bees, which is basically bees in a box, not on frames, but everything, or everyone in an open kind of screened box. Or a lot of beekeepers will sell nucleus hives, which is at the beginning of the beekeeping season. So they will breed up. They'll might make their own queens, or they might artificially divide hives and throw in a new queen in there. But basically, it depends on the pricing. Depends from anywhere from about $150 to about $300. You can buy a colony of
colony,
bee.
and that's a hive.
Yeah.
Guys, do you do you guys do that, or do you collect them, or if someone's found a hive in the garden and you're like, oh well, I've got young kids and I don't, it's pretty scary or whatever.
Yeah. So
would you collect that?
Basically, that's how we started initially we populated all of our hives from collected or unwanted swarms that we would go out and basically go and collect. So you'd see those people that would, looking in the bushes in a white bee suit with a box, trying to shake trees, trying to get the bees out of there.
And how do you get them in there?
You basically shake them in there and put the lid on, and if you've got the queen, they won't go. Or if they're happy with what is inside that box, they will stay there.
TV, Netflix,
all the comforts of the bee that the bees want.
Exactly. When you open that box, are they angry? Are they,
when you've relocated them?
Yeah, when you relocate. Does it take a while for? So when you would only relocate you get a swarm. Is that what you get? You get a swarm. That would have to go into an empty, an empty hive. You wouldn't be able to just put them into another one or whatever.
No. So an empty box, and then once they've settled and they're not going to abscond from what you've just offered them, then you put some frames in it for them to build up on.
So at first you just put them in a hive, an empty hive, and just let them fly. I don't know, just totally fly around inside.
And it's
as
long
used
as
to it.
it's basically if the workers are happy and the queen decides to stay, then they'll stay with her. So
could they do one? They could be like, hang on
absolutely. You put them in a box, you come back 4 hours later, they're gone again. They're up in the tree again, and you can do it 4, 5, 6 times, and they'll just not accept what you're offering.
We chased a swarm around the city one year. And it jumped out of the box like 3 times. It didn't want to be there. It just did not want to. It did not want us to to put it in a box. It was like, I want to be outside.
And do you think they would prefer it in trees and that, or not?
Yes and no. Sometimes you see some bees that have gotten desperate and not able to find a protective hollow, and they'll set up an open colony. Where you see just hanging combs in a tree, and they're so susceptible to cold weather and rain and wind that they don't thrive very well, which is kind of sad. So if we can get onto those reasonably early.
Do you see that here in Melbourne?
Yeah.
Do you?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I just think of like bears digging that, Winnie the Pooh or whatever, just shoveling honey in his face.
Well, they've got no natural predator here, so they're kind of relatively safe outside.
How did they get
ways.
here?
So your mates brought them. So
on
first fleet arrived,
£10 pounds, but
and so first fleet arrived. They brought traditional food crops with them, and when they got here, our native bees weren't used to any of that flora. So then someone went down to Cook's Cottage. There's a post box out the front. Posted a letter back home to the motherland, and said send pollinators. No, so bees arrived on the second fleet. On
the second fleet, is that right?
Isabella, on one of the boat, the Isabella, and there was another boat that some hives arrived on as well. It's noted in some old literature in the newspaper articles that bees were brought across on the second fleet.
Bloody hell! So where do you have hives?
Many locations.
Yeah.
So we look after.
I don't know the exact place. I don't know.
No, that's okay. Them. There is a map. There's a map, but most of them you can't get to because they're on rooftops, right?
Yeah.
So we keep about current count is we look after about 120 beehives. We look after those across about 30 odd sites. So there's a lot of travel time in between our hives. We have approximately 25 hives that reside in the CBD grid on rooftops as well. So right in the city. Yeah. But most of our hives are in the city or on the city fringe and pretty much a trail leading out to Heidelberg.
Oh, really?
Because that's where we're based out there. So
we just made a dense corridor all the way.
There's a big corridor going into the city and back.
I know it's quite common around the world. Paris, New York. Is it New York?
So this is cool. What originally happened is back many years ago now, when we went from our backyard beekeeping with our 1 or 2 hives, it was Vanessa one morning woke up and said to me, we've got to do something more with the bees. We've got to take bees back to the city. And I thought that was an odd thing to say first thing to me in the morning. Yeah. And then worked out what Vanessa's getting at, something more for the bees and looking at bringing them to the city. So we jumped on Google over a morning coffee and thought we'd come up with an amazing idea that we're going to put them on the rooftops. It's underutilised. There'll be a big wave of rooftop gardening. We'll be on board with this. And then Google told us, no, this has been going on for hundreds of years. You haven't come up with your own idea. But nothing's going on in Melbourne. Yeah. And we thought we would be tied up with the whole rooftop garden movement, but it doesn't seem to have been as active as what we expected is the rooftop garden movement. There is a little bit here and there, but we thought it'd be a huge uptake in Melbourne. Yeah. But still, we went ahead with activating rooftops with beehives, and that's been reasonably successful.
Yeah, I mean the Parisians are well known for it. The New York City beekeepers, they're pretty well known for their beekeeping, and the English have really had a quite a history with keeping bees as well. I mean, even though you guys have a shorter season, you're still very, very keen. And when we have people, when we do markets and stuff, I tell you, the English, they love their honey.
Yeah.
They really, really do.
Yeah, I love honey, honestly.
Yeah, and we've even seen through social media, we see the different bee seasons around the world as we going into our winter. The UK is going into their summer, and a couple of summers ago there was swarms throughout London City, and one of them was in
Oxford Street.
Oxford Street. And there was a crowd around this beehive in Oxford Street, and people were praising it, so excited to see bees in the city. We're like, oh man, I wish they were so positive about that. If we have bee swarm here, whether it's our bees or not, in the city, it's going to be our fault. But
although Sydney had a swarm last year, and they landed on a bicycle right in the heart of the CBD, and that actually was a really good news story because it made the mainstream news, and it went across the world. It went quite viral around the world, and it was just like, it was lovely to see the fact that people were just hanging around taking photos really up close and personal, because the thing is, swarms are not aggressive. So when colonies decide to split, and even though they may be hanging somewhere and they look kind of scary, they're actually at their most passive, because they're not interested in us. They're looking for a new home. They don't have any brood or baby bees and stores to look after. They're kind of just, they're out to
a good time.
they're in transit, and they don't have anything to protect. So it's actually bees inside a hive that are going to be the most defensive.
Because it's their home.
Yeah, it's their home. And our role, if you think about it, we go in with our suits on. So we're masked bandits, ransacking their home, taking what we deem valuable, throwing it back together,
They've
and
worked
walking
their asses
away.
off.
Speak for yourself. I don't ransack nobody.
But technically, it's like a home invasion. And so you can expect that they're going to be a little bit upset with the beekeeper. And so that's...
And I used to... when we were at school, I got a matchbox, and... I was killing bees, I was a kid. It's not ideal, I know.
So you put the bees in the box.
Put the bees in the matchbox. I was like, I was just a kid.
Yeah.
On my way to on the way to school. Put the matchbox in my desk. The thing that you lift up like that, and then I heard bzzz, bzzz, and there was like 10 bees inside this matchbox that I'd got. It was in there, and next thing you know, I was like, bzzz, bzzz, and I could hear them buzzing. I was like, "Oh fuck, that's the bees, man! The bees they must have got out of this thing somehow." And I opened my thing, and out come all these bees in the classroom. Oh man,
That's pretty good.
I was like, I must have just like knocked them out or something, but I hadn't killed them, and there was bees all in the class. It was a big nightmare.
Did you take responsibility for it, or did you get away with it?
No, I let it. No, of course, everyone knew it was me.
You
You just say, I don't know.
No, because everyone just knew it was me. You know what I mean?
No, I would have tried to deny it.
That's Robbie again in his antics.
Like, teacher open the window, get these. It was all right in the end.
Did anybody get stung?
No.
No.
Well then,
Were they honeybees or bumblebees?
Bumblebees.
Bumblebees.
Wow. That's cool.
Yeah, but I have been stung. I've been stung twice. It's not that bad, I don't think. It really isn't.
We do get stung all the time.
It's not that bad. People get scared. It really isn't. I was scared. Even I'm some brave superhero. But I was a bit nervous about what happens?
What's going to happen, right?
And I got stung. I was like, that's all right.
Yeah.
It's not too bad.
We do lose our immunity, so to speak, when we come out of winter. So the first sting of the season always hurts. It's stung. The more generally you build an immunity to it, and that immunity lasts for, they say, 8 to 10 weeks. So by the end of the season, we can be stung, not even need to pull the stinger out immediately, and you get a tiny little red dot, smaller than a mosquito bite.
Serious?
So nothing by the end of the season. But there is a...
So how many times will you get stung in a season, do you reckon?
I don't like wearing a full suit because it gets hot, so I just wear normal work pants. So I generally get stung all up my legs all the time. Yeah, so a couple of times a day sometimes. And generally I try and keep the stings below the knee. I don't like them getting up any higher than that. It starts getting a bit risky. Yeah, so it does still hurt. So that sting always hurts. There's a bit of venom. It hurts for a good 10 minutes sometimes. Some older bees with a lot more venom hurts than a young bee. But there is that tiny, less than 1% of the population that is anaphylactic.
Yeah.
So bee allergy, and this is something that a lot of the general public get confused about, being allergic to bees. A lot of us believe we're allergic to bees, or a doctor has told us we're allergic to bees. Bee allergy means you stop breathing and you fall over on the ground and you need adrenaline or you need a tube in your throat to breathe.
Not it hurts.
Anything less than that is not a bee allergy. It's just a response to venom, to envenomation. So the other thing that we get, sometimes on extremities where, there's less lymphatic drainage and things like that, you'll get a swollen novelty hand for a couple of days.
Faces swell.
Yeah, so that kind of thing, but that is an allergy. That's just normal reaction to venom.
Monty, my son, he was coming down the bank here in the summer, and he fell off and he smashed his face, and it was a nightmare.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was coming in and he said, "Oh, Dad, look, I did this. Look, and have a look." And he said, "I did this," and he walked down. He showed me just where he fell off, and his face was all bruised and everything. He goes, "Oh, look, I fell." And then he hit the roof, hit the sky, and he stood on a bee while showing me what he'd just done to his face.
Oh, no.
And he was screaming, man. But he took it.
Distracted him from the face.
Yeah, and exactly. He totally did. All of a sudden,
That was a new problem.
Yeah. We just put him in. The neighbour actually said, just get it in cold water.
Yeah, ice.
Yeah,
that helps a lot.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
it's funny. I don't get stung as much as Matt. I do wear a full suit, so I don't have the issue that he has with them crawling up my pants. I do wear, I go through stages where I do and don't wear gloves in the hive as well. But, if you're gentle and you're slow movements, kind of like Tai Chi style, most of the time, and you take your time and you be present, you'll generally have a good time. You'll be fine. Most of the time you'll be fine. If you're respectful towards them. And I know it sounds kind of crazy and it sounds like we're acting like, I don't know, 1960s hippies, but the thing is, there's this level of respect that you need to show them if you want to enter their domain.
Exactly, and also if you see them in the garden, there's no need to try and whack them.
Don't swipe.
Yeah,
swiping means fight.
Yeah, exactly. Like I see
hard,
people
though.
they're all right. They're all right.
So bees actually have no interest in humans whatsoever.
Yeah.
They are absolutely driven to work and want nectar and pollen. Sometimes in hot weather, they may come into our human space in search of water. Just because they keep that hive at that perfect temperature all year round, they actually consume water, but they also use water for evaporative cooling.
They have their own air conditioning too.
So they do need access to water, and sometimes they'll come into a human space for that. But generally, they have no interest in humans. Sometimes we confuse them with perfumes and hair products and other things.
Flowers, thinking that
and so they'll stop. Sometimes even the colours of our clothing, blue, they're attracted to. They'll stop for a second, hang around a human for probably less than 3 seconds generally,
realise
that you're not a food source, and they'll be on their way. Yeah. And it's in that short time, if you swat at them, they think, oh, you want to fight. And they're pretty good at fighting.
Yeah, for sure. But I think people get mixed up between bees and wasps.
Yeah, so wasps are the ones that will hang out at the barbecue and will annoy you over your food.
Carnivores.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
and so the best trap to make to catch wasps is meat-based traps, because bees aren't interested in meat.
Yeah, because a lot of people will try and make sweet traps, and the thing is you'll get bees as well, and you'll end up getting bees and wasps. Yeah. But meat is definitely... wasps come in and take out bees as well. Yeah. So, as a beekeeper, we don't really love the wasps. I mean,
everyone hates a wasp.
I know, someone's going to have to love them somewhere. They're there, right? So they have to be here. They're like doing some kind of cleanup job for the insect cleanup world.
For sure.
But they're not particularly liked. So we do often, every season, we get numerous inquiries about bees are being a problem, and we have to go down and we have to go down the question path of, are they furry? Are they black and yellow? Do they have a hard exoskeleton? Are they acting in this way or that way? And to try and determine what they actually are.
Are they coming out of a hole in the ground?
Yeah.
That's wasps, not bees.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
So they live underground, are the wasps?
Generally, yeah. And they can have huge colonies underground. Yeah.
How can people get more involved? Like, in the garden, what kind of space do you need in your garden? You know, like what would you ever need? There's nothing in it.
Perfect size. Yeah, it's not there.
You don't need a lot of space if you're wanting to keep a beehive. You don't necessarily need a lot of space. You just need the right aspect for the bees. Generally, you want to place your hive where they get morning sun. In Australia, you need a little bit of protection from the afternoon sun. Us on rooftops, we generally use other buildings and parapets of roofs and things to kind to help them as well. But you literally can have a hive in a 1.5 meter square space. Mm-hmm. You don't need a lot of room.
And would you guys come if someone did want a hive in their house? Would you go there and say, we'll put a hive in here? Is that a service you offer?
We initially did that. We actually have a waiting list of about 300 or 400 people because we kind of got inundated when we first started. So many people were offering their gardens or buildings and say, "Can you come and put a beehive here or there?" And we initially, when we first got going, we were super, super excited. So we entertained a lot of things that weren't very realistic. And so we're actually pretty much at the moment we're maxed out to how many, like, what we can take on. We will look at places where we already have hives because it makes sense location wise. Yeah. If we already got a hive in that particular area, we will look at it because it would make our routes more efficient.
Yeah.
But if we don't have bees in that area, we kind of at the moment we're pretty much saying no because we're at our limit.
We wouldn't be able to service those bees properly.
So what can they do?
So then we would encourage people to, if you've got any inkling to have your own hive, we strongly encourage that. Definitely pursue that because it's a very rewarding hobby.
There's lots of beekeeping clubs and things, but
we would then generally throughout the year we might run a course or two depending on the demand.
Do you do tutorials? You should do YouTube. Yeah. You've got a YouTube channel?
We don't do YouTube. No.
You should do YouTube.
We haven't got a YouTube channel
to teach people how to do it.
But we can run some workshops and beginner courses as well as there's a lot of local clubs now running courses as well.
Okay.
But if you want to help bees in your area, I always encourage people to try where you can to plant some bee-friendly plants and flowers.
Which are what?
Generally, you're looking at open, pollinated, non-hybridized type of plants.
I know them.
So good old-fashioned kind of simple flowers. Yeah. Bees do like they like a mix. They
like herbs.
Do they?
Yeah, they love herbs. They love citrus. Yeah, citrus, they get a little caffeine kick out of citrus.
Oh, yeah, a bit of a buzz.
Yeah.
Yeah, they literally do. But, even if you can plant some basil, some thyme, some
tomatoes?
Rosemary, tomatoes as well. Tomatoes need the pollination, but, bees will come bees will collect. Generally, they'll just collect pollen from that. But that's okay. We still need them, and we still need them to come and do that job. Oh God, there's a huge lot. So, we have a list on our website as well from bee-friendly plants.
Which is what?
rooftophoney.com.au.
Yeah, perfect.
But the other thing is then think about the chemicals you're using in your garden as well.
Yeah.
Pests can be a problem, but there's other ways around pests. And you don't want to be killing the bees that do come and visit your garden if you're needing them for pollination.
Yeah. So, and then also buy honey from local suppliers.
From beekeepers.
Farmers markets, your local beekeeper, find someone near you rather than the industry giants that potentially are damaging the industry. Support local and buy local for sure. That's always of benefit for you and for the local producer.
For sure. Yeah. If anyone wants to find you, Instagram, Facebook.
Yeah, we're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook.
In the handles, Rooftop Honey.
Well, actually, when we first started, we put up a handle. It's actually Rooftop Bees, but you'll find us anyway. If you put Rooftop Honey in, you'll find us.
Perfect. Is there anything else you want to say?
No, thank you for having us.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. We covered a lot of stuff there. That's
thanks very much for coming. I appreciate it, and hopefully we can spread the word. And get people understanding the importance, not just from the honey, but from the pollination and
Yeah,
the rest of
totally.
it, and try and boycott them supermarkets and buy it from local.
Oh, yeah. As we said, read your labels. And if it's a big brand on a supermarket shelf, then
There's a good chance it's not.
Yeah, maybe.
All I can say is go urban bees and go help the bees and go help the bees in your
Better
local
flavour.
Yeah,
environment.
just
flavour.
think local.
And do you know? Before I go, do you know what I love? Toast, Vegemite, banana, and honey.
Oh,
It's unbelievable.
No.
I've never
it's
tried
not.
that combination.
It's unbelievable. I'm telling you, I absolutely love it. It's one of my favourite things. Anyway, okay, thanks very much for coming. All right, have a good one. If you enjoyed this week's episode, please tell a friend or give us a rating or review on your podcast app. It all helps to get more listeners. Thanks. Until next week, have a good one.